I never stopped being a musician. I never stopped being a musician. It's something you either are or you are not. I'm Electra Cortis. I am a violinist and a composer, and I'm Greek. Music is the center of my life. I'm Electra. Sad words go along with happy music. Sad story and very lively rhythm and music. Hi. I'm Electra Cortis. Music is the center of my life. Music that's unpredictable. Music is something that holds my life together. It's like having a tree deeply rooted in the ground. So you always go back to folk music to protect your roots. Music is something that holds my life together.
Hello, good afternoon, and greetings. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Loki Karuna. I'm the Director of Artist Equity for the American Composers Orchestra, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's professional development session titled Beyond Bars, Creating Non-Traditional Scores and Parts. The music that we were just enjoying there was written by one of the composers, who I'll introduce and welcome to the screen here in a few minutes. That was Embrace from Curtis Stewart's Grammy-nominated Of Love. Congrats to Curtis again for that. So today's session is a part of our broader Earshot initiative, which is the nation's first systemic program for building relationships between orchestras and composers. Through Earshot readings, collaboratory fellowships, consortium commissions, and professional development, Earshot expands the definition of American orchestral music to ensure a vibrant and inclusive future. Earshot is a program of American Composers Orchestra completed in partnership with the American Composers Forum, the League of American Orchestras, and New Music USA. For more information on Earshot readings and all of our other Earshot programs, feel free to visit our website, americancomposers.org. We actually have some upcoming programs for you to check out and apply to, so be sure to visit the website and keep an eye there for what's coming up. Now, I'm sure you may have many questions or comments that come to mind over the course of this presentation. So if you wouldn't mind offering those using the Q&A function here on Zoom as we go along, we'll get to as many of those questions near the end of today's presentation as we can. And if you'd like to come on screen to ask your question live at the end of today's presentation, feel free to use the hand raise function here on Zoom and keep that digital hand raised, and I'll bring as many of you onto the screen as time allows. I'll also be offering a survey in the chat at the conclusion of today's presentation. So if you wouldn't mind clicking that link when it appears, and offering your feedback, it will be much appreciated. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to today's featured speakers, beginning with Jannina Norpoth. Twice Grammy-nominated violinist Jannina Norpoth made her debut as a soloist with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra at age 14. Since then, she's built a career as an innovative collaborative artist with a passion for contemporary music, genre bending, and improvisation, a sought after arranger and orchestrator, and an advocate for a more inclusive and versatile landscape in classical music. Her ensemble, Public Quartet, is widely recognized for their trailblazing programming and practice, receiving the 2019 Visionary Artist Award from Chamber Music America and the 2015 CMA ASCAP Award for Adventurous Programming. Ms. Norpoth has performed internationally, including appearances on Lincoln Center's Great Performer Series, Kennedy Center's Arts Across America, Mostly Mozart Festival, Composers Now, Women of the World Festival at the Apollo Theater, the Ecstatic Music Festival, VH1's Save the Music, and Saturday Night Live. As a soloist, she's performed with the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra, the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, the Quad City Symphony, and has been featured alongside acclaimed musicians, including James Carter, Hiromi, Regina Carter, Marcus Belgrave, Jay-Z, Beyonce, Pharrell, Stevie Wonder, Anita Baker, My Brightest Diamond, and many others. She currently lives in Brooklyn with her husband, John Paul Norpoth, and Puggle, Vegas. Jannina, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to this webinar. Oh, and I think I have to give you permission to open your camera. There we are. Welcome, Jannina. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. You're looking beautiful in blue with your matching
Thank you.
earphones and everything. All right,
Indeed.
and for Curtis praised for combining omnivory and brilliance by the New York Times. This four-time Grammy Award-nominated violinist and composer translates stories of American self-determination to the concert stage. As a solo violinist, composer, artistic director of the American Composers Orchestra, professor at the Juilliard School, and member of award-winning ensembles Public Quartet and the Mighty Third Rail, Curtis realizes a vision to find personal and powerful connections between styles, cultures, and musics. Welcome to the stage, Curtis. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hello.
Oh,
See,
you're looking beautiful as well. Wow.
you know, I was waiting for it. I just wanted to hear it.
Well, I'll turn it over to the two of you. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you, Loki. I'm so excited to be talking to you, Jannina, here about we're basically letting all the secrets out from our Public Quartet co-conspiracy that we've been enacting for the last 12 or 13 years. So I'm so excited to be talking to you here in this forum.
I like that you call it a co-conspiracy.
I guess it'll be less of a conspiracy now that we're talking about it in public, right? Or out of public. So I guess my question is why? We're talking about beyond bars. We're talking about arranging or just using notation maybe outside of the quote unquote traditional notation, even though some of these new notations have existed since before classical music existed, but you know, I'm going to let that go for now. Or at least 1950 or 1960, we have several examples that we can share. But I guess my question for you, I have my own answer, which I'll respond, but like, why do we need to get beyond, quote unquote, beyond the bars, beyond our current notation system?
Do we?
Yeah, do we? I guess that is a question.
I don't know. I personally feel like I don't have an answer for that question. You know, I have my feelings about it, which is, you know, I think as we're creating new music and we're at a point, I think, in music, which is really exciting because there's just so much of it. Classical music has existed for so many centuries, and it's gone through, so much rich history of music. And it's been influenced by all the countries that it has existed in, whether that be European countries or American countries, and then everything that has been brought to America, and it's global. Asia, there's classical music that exists all over the world, and it's been influenced by so many other cultures. And as we've broken rules through the centuries, there's a lot there's not a lot left to break in terms of rules, or maybe there is. There's still plenty of controversy. I think, I think we've both experienced that from audience members and people who have maybe listened to projects that we've done and been, slightly triggered by it. But I think it's for the composers and the creators to answer, what speaks to you as a creator, in terms of getting your ideas out and, creating the things that you want to create. And are you limited by the current notation system that exists? So, and if you are, then what helps, what allows you to translate those ideas to the people who are going to perform your music?
Right. And like, how can you experiment with various ways of notating those ideas for the varying ensembles that you happen to be in? I love that. I think a lot of this notation actually, the questions of notation also question the nature of what is classical. I love how you brought up, for example, Indian classical music, or what is American actual classical music in that regard? Like, what is the classical music of Greece? What is the classical music of, we've never questioned American classical music in that regard, or at least many people rarely do. So we're using this mode of questioning notation and offering some other examples as
Yeah, I think there's both classical music, right? That is the native music of, different cultures. But then I think there's also like Western classical music that exists, globally as well. There are orchestras in South America. There are orchestras. There's, such a huge, European classical tradition in Asia and China and, Japan, Taiwan, Korea. And then and all of these in Africa, there's orchestras in Africa. And so and each of them have also brought, their own sense of identity to new classical music in those countries as well. So I
right.
think in both ways, as you talking about the word classical is just, we could spend the whole time just talking about
Yeah,
the
we
word
could just talk about that.
classical
We probably
and what the hell that means.
Yeah, and also
Anyway,
begs the question when we're talking about Indian classical music, or quote unquote classical music of various regions, what the difference is between that and folk music of those regions. You know, um, that's a whole other talk. Because I mean, somebody might argue that one is notated and one is more of an oral tradition. Some might know, one is like in a certain environment, from a certain environment, whether it be the church, the concert hall, the etc., versus one is in another environment, which kind of begs now that we're in this kind of like massively globalized, digitized, you can get
yeah.
any kind of music in any type of way at any time if you
But
have a certain
you made me
privilege.
think of an interesting example, actually, because um, recently premiered the version of Scott Joplin's Treemonisha that Jesse Montgomery and I worked on for a very, very long time. And just coincidentally, that same month that ours was premiered, there were two other productions. So ours premiered in Canada, so it was like an American-Canadian production. And with sort of like, there were new characters. So there was an African influence and there were African instruments that we brought into that. And then
Mm.
Damien Sneed, he created a version that he'd been working on, I think, since grad school, that premiered the same month in St. Louis Opera, which is more like a perspective of an autobiography of Scott Joplin's life that then transitioned into the opera. And then most fascinating was a South African version of Treemonisha that was like, the tree was actually like a character in the opera, and it was like balafone and vocals. And so it was like, I'm going off on a tangent, but it was like these
This is
three
good.
very different versions of this one American opera that the score doesn't exist. It's like a piano score, and three, and different composers and people globally interpreted that classical music and brought all of this other history and experience and culture to it. And and it's having this incredible afterlife in many different ways.
It's amazing. I mean, I wonder, that's kind of interesting, especially when a history has been kind of put down for so long. This massive work has been totally lost, and we have little bits of it. And then when as creators, we go back to those bits and we find so much meaning there, we want to bring it to life.
Yeah.
That's definitely a part of this, of going beyond what it means to be a quote unquote traditionally classical composer. If you're recreating or stemming out of the unfinished works of others, I mean, it's also something that people did. I mean, Bartok's last, the viola concerto wasn't finished. Mozart's Requiem wasn't. There's so many things that aren't finished that it's totally fine to finish them when we call it Mozart or we call it Bartok, but somehow there's a question mark when with other composers. So I'm just gonna I'll leave that information out there and people can draw their own conclusions. But that's another reason for kind of going quote unquote beyond the bars. Should we share some examples of just some ways, both historic and some things that we've done, or do you have any other thoughts before we get into that?
Let's get into it.
Let's get into it. So some of the earliest examples are that I have are composers totally blowing up notation and going into graphic scores. There's also music that attempts to embrace the improvisatory and finding ways of making that happen, either in an orchestral context. Most of our experience, Jannina and I, is in a quartet context. So we have specifically Jess Meyer's Get Into the Now, as well as some of the pieces that Public Quartet has created. And we're going to get into just the details of notation, and also lack of both clarity and ambiguity of notation as a technique, as a spectrum to kind of get into. So why don't I share my screen? And let me know if everybody can hear this once we're there. Boom. Okay. So this is Cornelius Cardew's treatises. And you'll see, we'll just play a little bit of it, but you'll see a graphic score kind of unfolding as people are interpreting these lines and images. I think that's so, there's just so much information happening here. And for me, there's both very specific information in terms of there are certain pitch cells that you see pop up in a box. There's also very specific information in terms of those numbers and the interval content that must be happening. But there's also very open information in terms of the lines and shapes. I think performers can interpret that as in terms of just the motion that you're using. You can interpret it in terms of the pitch content and the directions that it's going. I don't know, Jannina, if you have any reactions to that.
Um, no, I just enjoyed watching that score. Um, and I would want to know if there was like a key. There's just like there's so many ideas that come to mind when I see a lot of circles like that, and then the line of stillness um obviously makes sense, but yeah, I haven't like actually performed a ton of graphic scores, and it is always an adventure for me, like, finding the context, and it's exciting. It always feels like an adventure. And there's just so much more creative license as a performer, and a challenge to really, be free from, what you're, usually what a score is usually commanding from your, practice.
Right. And the score requires you to ask questions,
Mm.
um, because there are so many questions that you might have.
I mean,
Actually, let me
every
just,
score requires you to ask questions, I
right.
think. I think we just know we know how to answer the questions in, more traditional scores, and in, styles of music that we, went to school and studied very, diligently how to practice and perform.
Well, I think there's a lot of assumptions that get made also. For
Mm.
example, the dash. What is a dash? Who knows what a
Mhm.
dash is? I don't know. We constantly argue what a dash means. We constantly argue exactly what a dot means.
Mhm.
In string world, dot means one thing. In brass world, dot means totally something else. A forte piano, it can be like a, or it could be like a, these markings mean so many different things. And so there's a lot that I think we assume because we've been taught.
Right.
And
Or
so
we've listened to recordings, or, there's a lot
yeah.
of like we talk about like oral tradition not necessarily like existing in classical music the way it does in other cultures, but there is actually a ton of oral tradition in classical music, in the past 100 years, where the recording industry has actually like really changed and defined, how we interpret music and the legacy of these pieces that we keep in the repertoire.
I'm going to play another example. Here's a Xenakis piece. Uh, it does have the key. Maybe I'll play a little bit of this. I'll play a little bit of John Cage, uh, and then we can get into some more of that kind of oral improvisatory zone. That's right where it gets interesting, but I don't want to run out of time. This is actually a transcription of the Xenakis that is a graphic score of a piece that already exists. I wonder what would happen if people interpreted this. Here's the John Cage.
You could enter your heart non tanto haso giovanic.
This kind of begs the question in the age of digital scores. If I were to turn the sound off and play this for you all, just the sensation of what sounds you would make as you're watching it. That a score can be a video. I have a student that and it begs a lot of questions. I had a student who presented me with a video and asked me to play it. And my initial questions were, okay, is the color related to harmony? Is the rate of change of that little blue line as it moves, is that related to how I'm using melody? How are you relating to the score? And as the composer, you can be thinking more or less abstractly or more or less ambiguously in terms of how these images move the music of the music maker and why. You know, the question is kind of why not notate something in a traditional way based on this? And I think the answer is because the quality of freedom that the performer has as they're playing it is what you're looking for. You're looking for that sense of ownership. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I just want like a Saturday morning cartoon channel that's just this.
Actually, it sounds like a great project. I bet
I would watch it all the time.
That sounds like a grant right there. Saturday morning cartoons for creative music making. I love it.
And then you can turn the sound off and do your own jam.
Right. Something that's a little bit more in between. I just want to present Inti Pigivisueta's T and Mikasa, which is one of the first graphic scores that we kind of engage with as quartet. It is actually fairly traditional in that you're seeing there's tons of pitches, but it's all based on time. I always think it's interesting. This is an old idea, but it's something that a lot of students that I've encountered aren't aware of, that there's information that you can give that spans over time, and it allows the performers to not necessarily improvise totally freely, but they're improvising within a certain framework.
Labels.
Just so you're clear, there's also a verbal track that kind of goes over all that.
Labels. Everywhere I go, someone is trying to slap one on me. Female, not very quiet. Woman, old enough. Professional, on minimum wage. The layer for today. Skin.
Clear.
Woman,
You told me that because I did not fear love, that I was
I
less than.
cringe when I hear that.
You told me that because of who I love, that I am that.
Honey,
You tell me that my
I
being
am
is
a black
wrong.
woman.
That it is you who
Loving you
fears,
forever,
and who does not love, and it is you who is wrong.
by the brilliant
Woman.
occurrence of my continent of
From
origin.
birth you assign me with a coded vocabulary. From birth you teach me that I must be a pawn. From birth you demand my compliance. But what if I refute your violent vocabulary? I will ascend above your rigged game, and I refuse to comply. Of color. Born of my ancestors' joy, you alienate me from them. Born of a different skin color, you scream that I am not worthy to be called black or indigenous. Born of my parents, you insist that I do not belong. But my ancestors are with me, and I with them. I am worthy, and I belong here on this earth. Being a woman of color, I have known love and fear, right and wrong. I have fought their violence and vile words. I refuse to play their game and to comply, and I know that I belong here on this earth where my ancestors once stood because I am worthy of this life.
I am not a minority, even if your out-of-date statistics and washed brain makes you see me as someone to pity. I am one of a majority. I am an African. We are many. We are the majority. The beautiful people.
That's such a great piece. I feel bad turning it off. I just want to be listening to it. I think it's so cool. Because
Is that
there's
our
that.
recording?
I think that's our recording. Is it? I
Yeah,
don't know. Yeah,
I
that's
think
us.
it
Whoops.
is.
Yeah, we did
Wow.
good. We did okay. The point is though, like with that fixed media, you can turn on, you can hit the timer and we can then rehearse with the timer and kind of figure out how to be together. But we can also figure out how to react to the words naturally and the way it feels and find the timing with the words and how we feel that day. I don't know. I think that's a brilliant version of somewhere in between quote unquote standard notation and something that's more graphic, not graphic, but whatever, outside of the bars, whatever.
I just think there's so many. I think timing is underexplored in general in our field, and for me, that's like um just a really interesting medium to explore, and allow different opportunities to, for musicians to really create their own sense of time, to create their own sense of tempo, to create their own rhythm within the context of notes.
Right. I also
And there's
think
just so many ways to do that, like you said.
right, yeah. And it requires the players to truly feel the intent of the composer, and with that's not a libretto, but with the words that have been curated for that specific piece, it's like it'd be very difficult not to feel with Inti, or at least with Inti's intent, and to then begin to empathize, even if you are not a woman of color, and experiencing those labels as that narrator is experiencing them. You begin to empathize through the music, and so the music actually starts to embody a certain kind of um, equity in a way. You're changing yourself by playing the piece. But I think that's why she's brilliant, because she's able to do that. Should we get into some of the oral traditions that we were kind of talking about earlier, at least within Puzzle Quartet? Why don't we start with how about the Ornette Coleman? Does that feel good? Or should we do Dvorak first? I don't know which one. I guess
Let's do Ornette. I feel like it's
Ornette.
a segue from Inti.
Cool. So,
Are we listening? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So there's in our recent album, What is American? We worked on the two pieces by Ornette Coleman, Street Woman and Law Years. And it was essentially us exploring how to improvise freely and also accomplish the goals of sounding like a quote unquote string quartet and feeling like we can embrace and own the music that's coming out despite the other three members being totally free. How do we build a language and also become free through it? So this was our initial score. This is created by Hamilton Berry, the cellist in our group. There's a melody that Ornette Coleman composed that Hamilton transcribed, and he kind of broke it up into cells that we kind of figured we could improvise with in different ways. At first, we used a structure. This was a written structure that he wrote out. And then once we started playing it over and over again, we realized we were not, in fact, free. We were trapped within that structure. So the idea of becoming free from our own bounds was a new test. And actually, the notation that we used to try to play the music was, in fact, the lack of notation, the trying to literally not talk about this piece every time we played it to see what would happen. And here's what came out. Oh, good. Let's see if I can play from my computer. Can you all hear this?
Oh, yeah.
And it continues. I think it's interesting thinking about that from a chamber or solo context, but to give an orchestra such a wide open arrangement like that, I imagine would be nearly impossible. I don't know. What do you think, Jannina? Or at least something would be impossible about it.
I don't know if I don't know. It'd be really interesting to try. And I was actually thinking about this when we played one of the ornets for the Carnegie workshop a couple days ago, and really just thinking of it as if you were like gonna give somebody a sentence to say, like, say, what is American? And then you instructed everybody to say that sentence and at their own pace, in their own dynamic, at their own timbre, break it up, do it, it could be American is what, it could be, what, and a whole room of people. And then what happens when people do that? And that's essentially what we do in those ornets. So, maybe that could happen with, an orchestra. And I think the toughest thing with orchestras is that a lot of these skills are not necessarily taught in school. So there's a learning process that has to happen with the players in the ensemble. Not always, but very often. And if you're not there in the room to sort of like be their guide in terms of, how they actually approach and do that, or if somebody isn't able to sort of say, I've done this before, here we go, this is how we interpret this, then it can actually be impossible. So I don't know,
Right.
or at least that's my experience, trying to work with ensembles that perhaps aren't as, forward thinking, or don't feel like they have the tools to interpret something in the way that you intend for them to interpret it.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's a reason for music like this to be on an orchestra audition. I'm just going to say it out loud right now. I just said it. I'm gonna get fired immediately.
I support that.
But, you know,
you
they
can't
have to
fire
do
me.
those, for ensembles that are truly forward thinking and truly interested in making music that is reaching out to other genres, styles, peoples, etc. Why wouldn't you? You would need to have this skill. This is a skill. It's not something that we can just teach in a 30-minute webinar. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's something that it's a lived experience that needs to be shared. And you would, yeah. So
I mean,
anyway,
I think people are, players are often, we get stuck in the idea that we're professionals and we're supposed to know everything. And, I think it's very hard for a lot of people to feel like they don't know what they're doing in any piece. So that doesn't mean, I feel like that's the same, if it's like a graphic score that is unfamiliar, or if it's like Samuel Coleridge Taylor, which is like straight up, or, romantic music, or Florence Price, and it's still unfamiliar because, you have to learn a piece and understand, the style, but like you still have to learn the piece and understand all the parts and, put it together. And I think that can be equally intimidating and uncomfortable for people.
Why don't we have, in a few minutes, we have to go to Q&A, which I not have to, but I would love, I can't wait to get to Q&A. I want to share a little bit of Dvorak, which is we've been sharing very abstract and kind of quote unquote genreless music, however you want to say that. So this music truly is of our oral history. The Dvorak American Quartet is something that every string player has kind of like heard in the classical field. We've just lived with it. We know those themes. That viola solo at the beginning of the first movement is something most of us can sing like on command. It is truly an oral history. It is already beyond the bar in a way. And so what we've done is as quartet, we've tapped into those roots that, Dvorak was inspired by music of America, Negro spirituals, Native American folk songs, etc. Tapped back into those roots and began to improvise on that music in very specific and guided ways. We have scores, but really it is an oral. It's more like a contract, more like the score that we saw with Hamilton's Street Women, where there's instructions on each section and we all have our own function. So there's an element where we're improvising every time, and then there's also an element that we're doing something similar every time. But the ensemble itself has to kind of decide how to notate that, and the ensemble decides how to remember, which kind of challenges the nature and value of a score, and whether it makes something classical, whether it has a score or not. Anyway, here is an excerpt. This is from several years ago. If you want to compare and contrast, this is an excerpt from 2019. We recorded the Dvorak on our album when was that? 2021, I guess. And so there are elements that are the same and there are elements that are different. We're not going to play both of them right now because we're running out of time. But if you want to go do some research, the people who are watching, feel free. Okay. Whoops. Oh man, YouTube. Thank you, YouTube, for the
Yeah, that's some really great stuff. Thank you. And I did want to mention What is American, the album. I was going to grab it, but I forgot it's sitting proudly on my Kwanzaa altar next to my Kinara. So I look at the CD every day. So there are a few questions that I wanted to highlight that have come up over the course of this. The first one is that we've talked a lot about non-traditional scores, but what about non-traditional parts? When we make non-traditional scores, are musicians looking at something different than this newly realized score?
Mm. I think in our experience, in my experience, I tend to want to play off a score in general, and knowing what's happening around me is very helpful. In an orchestral context, that could be quite unwieldy. I think there's a way to zone in on the part and then start adding, like you'd have to add in cues. That also affects what type of notation you use. If there are timestamps, you don't necessarily have to add in as many cues because everybody's just on the clock. If it's more like section A is on cue, and within section A you're doing the backward sound thing until section B is cued, or until you hear the oboe play this melody, then it might be helpful to have certain cues in the parts. But it's a great question for an orchestral setting. I think it depends on the nature of the quote unquote non-traditional score that is being used. Jannina, do you have a thought on it?
No, I think you covered it.
Actually, this is a great
No.
question. Are there parts for Threnody? I've only looked at the
Yeah,
score for
there's
Threnody.
parts for Threnody. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a great example. Yes.
And when it comes to engaging these scores, and in some cases these parts in a different way, Jannina, I wonder if you can speak to the question of really getting musicians involved, especially when we're talking about improvisatory music, really as a type of composer in performance. As you mentioned, so many of us are trained in a very specific way. What have been your experiences in opening up musicians to playing beyond bars, not just writing beyond bars?
You know, I think it depends on the musician, but I think, one of the things we've been fortunate to do in Public Quartet is we do a ton of improvisation workshops, and we've worked with like all ages of people, and we kind of break it down. A lot of it is just the mindset, and breaking down the mindset that says that improvisation has to be one way, or you have to create this epic thing. There's just a lot of pressure, especially the better I think we are as musicians, the more pressure we put up on ourselves to, create genius with every sound or, reaction that we make. So it's breaking that down to, allow yourself to connect with, whatever comes out, right? Because I'm improvising right now. I'm talking to you. We do it every day when we speak, is all improvisation and reaction to what other people say. And that's the same thing when we're going to music. It's a conversation. And one of my most favorite things outside of Public Quartet that I do is I teach at a program at Colburn called Fortissimo, which is a professional development program for young women of color. And I've now made it part of the curriculum that they learn improvisation with me. They give a chamber music concert at the end of the program, which is all BIPOC women composers. And in addition to those works, they do improvisation with me over the week, which is not just like learning improvisation, but it's also like a bonding experience, and a nonverbal communication with each other. And I'd done it with a graphic score the first year, and in actually one of Inti's quartets, not the one we played for you, but another one called Tamla Land, which is equally amazing. And the girls who were in that piece were terrified in the beginning, and they were kind of like, what the hell is this that you've given to us? And the progression of seeing them over the week, once I sort of gave them basic tools for improvisation, and then we started to, think about the piece and think about, break down these aren't just notes, these are characters, these are scenes, these are sensory things, and talk about like, what it could possibly be, and then interpret that as a group, really as their imagination started to open up. There was this incredible thing that happened. And by the end of the week, it was the most powerful thing that they did. And all the girls who were not in that group were so jealous that they wanted to be in that group. And so I was like, okay, now we have to do a graphic score with everybody every year, and that has to be part of the program, because it does actually, and allow them so much more freedom, not just like within the music, but also within themselves. It's finding a part and trusting yourself, which is a big part of what we're working on in the program, from the get-go, is just trusting yourself and trusting your own instincts. And that goes across the board as a human and improvisation.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for that. I know we're a little over time, but I'll offer one more question that I'm seeing here from the chat. Anne Marie is asking if you have suggestions or examples of scores that fuse the traditional with the non-traditional. So maybe there are sections that are composed and written in a way that most musicians would recognize, next to maybe the next B section that isn't quite like that.
I actually think Threnody for Victims of Hiroshima is a great example of that. That's from, many years ago. There's also we've been playing Get Into the Now by Jessica Meyer, where there's whole sections where it's like open drum solo, and then there's other sections where one person has an improvised part and everybody else has written out very specific information. There are a lot. Why can't we copy the link in the chat? There's several. I don't know, Jannina, if you have any off the top of your head.
Well,
I just shared Alexandra Vrebelov. Maybe that was the question. Alexandra Vrebelov, My Desert, My Rose, which is part of the Kronos Quartet 50 for the future. You could check that out. It's free. It's on their website. In fact, many of the Kronos Quartet 50 of the future pieces are great examples of this. I can point you to various ones if you have other questions. Some others that we did were, we learned that idea Jannina was talking about, where what happens when everybody walks into a room differently? What does that look like? I remember we were talking to Henry Threadgill about that, and his piece is one of the 50 for the future pieces. Basically, he was looking for what happens when 5 dancers just walk into the room. What if that was the choreography of the motion of the bodies and limbs? That is the piece. Yeah, so those are some good examples. Sorry, Jannina, I interrupted you.
No, all good. I was going to say John Quirigliano's string quartet.
Oh, that's a great one. Yes,
That's a great example.
So somebody asked about crazy time signatures. The fourth movement, the fugue movement, is in literally 3 or 4 time signatures at the same time. But it looks very good. It's just really hard to play. It sounds really cool too. The third movement is entirely no time signature at all. And so that third movement is a great exercise in things aligning, and then also having freedom for people to do various things.
Wonderful. And I do see that some people are having a little difficulty copying and pasting links from the chat. But what we will do as a follow-up when we release this recording for you to take a look at later, we'll also have a list of all of the materials and resources that each and every one of you can check out to continue your exploration beyond bars, so to speak. Jannina, Curtis, thank you so much for joining us and leading this conversation. Really appreciate all of your insights, experiences, and artistry. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
All right, well, just a few things before everyone runs away. I am putting into the chat right now a link to a survey. So if you click that link, we would really love for you to offer your feedback on today's session. That helps us build future sessions and understand how we can serve you even better. I'd also love to welcome you back this time next week, Monday, December 18th at 4:30 p.m. Eastern, for our next webinar on the topic of creating and maintaining relationships with orchestras. We're very excited to have Curtis back for that one, as well as David Ludwig from Juilliard. Hope you'll join us for that one. Another huge thanks to our Earshot partners, the American Composers Forum, New Music USA, and the League of American Orchestras. We're very grateful to the many individuals and organizations who have made Earshot possible through their support, and to ACO's artists, staff, and board for making this program a reality. For more information on Earshot, including how you can apply as a composer or connect with us to bring the program to your orchestra, visit us at americancomposers.org. Special thanks to our Earshot funders, the Altman Foundation, Elizabeth and Justice Schlichting, the Mellon Foundation, the Sphinx Venture Fund, TD Charitable, Fromm Foundation, the Ford Good Neighbor Committee, Aaron Copeland Fund for Music, Alice M. Ditson Fund of Columbia University, the League of American Orchestras with support of the Virginia B. Toolman Foundation. Thank you so much for all of your support. Any questions, feel free to send me a note, Loki@americancomposers.org, and we will see you here next week. Have a great evening.